Hey class, and welcome to part 6 of lighting. This section will be covering daylight. Now, if you remember from our lesson on color distribution, daylight is great. At the top here, we've got a full spectral distribution, which is great. It's something that is really hard to match with any other artificial light source, especially fluorescence, which just peak at a couple of different wavelengths. Sunlight, we've got the full spectrum. It means all the colors in a place look great, and it's what makes us feel happy. But there's an important distinction to be made between having adequate lighting in a space and having glare or sun basically penetrating a building directly. Imagine like beams of light hitting a desk. We want lots of natural light. We want this lower picture here where the light is actually getting kind of bounced around into the room, and we get a lot of that indirect light where it's a lot of illuminance on the surfaces, right? Reflected light, but we don't have that direct glare or luminance into our eyes because that's just not really comfortable to work with. So we really want to go about that in terms of design or recommendations for buildings by trying to separate out two different aspects of windows. One is a view and the other is a daylight window. Daylight, you're not expected to necessarily look out of. It could be opaque, but its primary function is to provide a whole lot of daylight bounced around deep into the space, maximizing the illumination on the walls and ceiling in a space. The view window is pretty obvious. It's what you want to look out of and see, which people like in offices. All right, so how do we kind of separate that out? How do we get view and illumination without a lot of glare or direct solar penetration into a building? One way to do that is with an overhang. So what you're trying to do is even at the lowest angle of sunlight on a building, you've got this exterior overhang that is going to block the sun that would normally shine right through the window and then onto a desk or into someone's eyes. And this is great for kind of south and west facing facades of buildings. The other thing is a light shelf, and that's basically an interior component of a window that really does separate out the daylight window from the view window. So you get an exterior overhang to block that direct solar penetration, and then you have this interior shelf, as you can see in this picture here, to basically bounce the light up into the rest of the space, which is great. And you want to really separate those out depending on the facade of the building. For south windows, you really want to prioritize that exterior overhang, right? Because otherwise you're going to get that setting sun, and it's going to be particularly hot in the summer with that direct solar penetration. Sometimes adding light shelves can be great. In terms of the west and east facades, prioritize the exterior overhang as well for that rising and setting sun. And sometimes add fins if you can. In terms of the north facade, you want a whole bunch of glazing because you're going to get a lot of indirect light through the north side of your building. In some cases, you might need fins. And let me just kind of walk you around the space where I am right now. And you can see right now there's a lot of pleasant light, but I don't have any of the interior artificial lights on. This is all daylight. But if I move around, you can see on the desk, we've got some glare issues. The sun is rising behind me, and that's not particularly comfortable to stare at. So one way they've gone about trying to fix that is adding some exterior fins to block a lot of that light. And you can see it helps in this room. It doesn't completely solve the problem. The other thing that they have added in, I'm going to just walk us out to the other side since we're at the corner office right now. All right, so now we are looking kind of southwest, And you can see here, there's an exterior light shelf, and the fins here are angled in such a way to bounce a lot of that natural light up into the space while avoiding direct glare. All right, let's pause here. All right, now we're back kind of in the northeast corner. You can see though on the south facade in this particular room, they've also added some shades. Shades are great. Shades are great. People are lazy though. And if they're not automated, they're not going to get moved all that often. So something to be aware of, that just because something has the potential to block a lot of light or glare doesn't necessarily mean that potential gets utilized. So if we get a lot of natural light, we can achieve something called daylight autonomy. There's a separate metric also called spatial daylight autonomy, but I think you'll get the general idea from just this. And it's the idea that a certain percentage of a room, a zone within a building, can achieve all the lighting necessary, all the illumination on the desk required for different tasks, so that you don't need any electric lighting. And that's the case where I am right now. I have plenty of natural light. I don't need to turn on the office lights. And you get different points for that in terms of LEED, and there are certain energy codes as well that prioritize that. And that's when you might need a photocell or photo controls to turn off the lights when you have adequate natural lighting. One thing to be aware of as well, we started off talking about like the full spectrum. So daylight, remember, it's a very high temperature in terms of its peak. We do get the full spectrum with natural light, but generally we consider daylight to be in the 5,000 Kelvin range. So if you have different lights that are on the yellowish end of the spectrum, the warm colors, warm whites, it's going to be a bit of a awkward contrast visually for people in the space. So if you see in this library down below, they have a different set of lights along the perimeter here. This is a daylighting zone, so these are off right now. Inside of the building, you've got some fluorescents and such that have a much warmer or lower temperature color. And if these were to be right next to the window, it looks bad. There's probably a better way of saying it, but it looks a little tacky to have this yellowish light contrasting against this bright daylight, right? Whereas in the evenings, this is much more comfortable on our eyes and we can associate it with kind of coziness. But during the daytime, having the two paired is a little bit awkward. All right, so just to wrap up, we want to avoid glare and maximize indirect light. We don't want to work in offices like this. At least I certainly don't. I mean, look at these high cubicles. It's blocking all of the natural light from penetrating the space. It's this yellowish color. I don't think anyone likes looking at themselves in that really yellowish light. So let's not do that, right? You also don't want to be staring directly at the sun. It might feel good on your face on a winter day, but you know, cataracts and blindness and radiation, you don't want that directly in your eyes. And it's really hard to look at your computer screen and do work while you're doing that. So don't have, you know, direct light coming into the office space. Instead, maximize views and indirect light, right? We want illumination on the surfaces around us while avoiding direct glare. All right, so that wraps up windows. We'll start talking about some of the thermal properties of them shortly.